They thought she was just the angry black girl from Detroit, until 4 football players ended up bleeding across the cafeteria floor in less than 10 seconds. Westbridge Academy was built for rich kids, future politicians, and spoiled athletes who thought racism was just another joke for lunchtime entertainment. So when they choked, mocked, and humiliated Nyla Carter in front of the entire school, they expected tears. What they got instead was a national MMA fighter with a buried past, a dead father tied to corruption, and enough rage to destroy an entire empire. Stay until the end, because this story doesn't end with a school fight, it ends with careers ruined, arrests made, and a truth powerful people were willing to kill for. And before we begin, comment below where you're watching this video from. Westbridge Academy looked less like a public high school and more like a private country club built for the children of powerful families. The campus stretched across several acres of polished green lawns, towering glass buildings, and massive football fields covered in banners celebrating decades of championships. Every hallway displayed framed photographs of smiling athletes holding trophies while wealthy donors stood proudly beside them. At Westbridge, status mattered more than grades. Money mattered more than rules. And if your family name carried influence, the school practically belonged to you. That was the first thing Nyla Carter understood the moment she stepped through the front gates. Dozens of students turned to stare at her as she walked across the courtyard with a backpack hanging from one shoulder. Some whispered immediately. Others openly pulled out their phones. News traveled fast inside Westbridge, especially when it involved someone new. A black girl transferring in the middle of the semester already attracted attention. But Nyla's arrival came with rumors. Nobody knew exactly what had happened at her old school in Detroit. Some said she had been expelled for violence. Others claimed she had hospitalized another student during a fight. The more dramatic versions called her dangerous as a end of sex. Nyla ignored every stare and every whisper as she followed the campus map toward her first class. She had spent years learning how to survive people looking at her like she didn't belong. The history classroom fell silent when she entered. Mrs. Linda Graves adjusted her glasses awkwardly before forcing a smile. "Class, this is Nyla Carter. She'll be joining us starting today." No one answered. Nyla could already feel the tension in the room before she even sat down. Then she noticed him. Mason Reed lounged near the back beside the window, wearing his yellow and white varsity jacket like a crown. The son of billionaire investor Charles Reed, quarterback, team captain, Westbridge royalty. 2 football players sat beside him laughing quietly, while girls nearby stared at him like he was a celebrity. Mason looked Nyla up and down slowly before smirking. So Detroit finally ran out of schools. A few students laughed immediately. Mrs. Bide, Graves sighed but didn't sound angry. "Mason," what he said casually. "I'm welcoming her." More laughter spread across the room. Nyla kept her face emotionless and walked toward an empty seat near the center aisle. She could feel phones recording already. Mason leaned back in his chair, clearly disappointed she hadn't reacted. "That's it," he called out. "No attitude. Guess the rumors were fake." Still nothing. For the first time, Mason's smile faded slightly. Most people at Westbridge either tried too hard to impress him or snapped back when insulted. Nyla did neither. She simply opened her notebook and stared at the front board while the classroom buzzed around her. That silence irritated him more than any insult could have. By lunchtime, almost the entire school knew her name. The cafeteria roared with noise, filled with athletes, cheerleaders, wealthy kids wearing expensive sneakers, and students desperately trying to fit into the invisible social hierarchy controlling the school. Nyla grabbed a tray quietly and moved toward an empty table near the far wall. Conversations lowered as she passed. Then Bryce Holloway stepped directly into her path. Unlike Mason, Bryce didn't have charm. He had something worse. Violence. Taller than almost everyone in school and built like a linebacker. Bryce carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences in his life. Rumors about him ranged from illegal street fights to putting another student in the hospital sophomore year. None of it had ever stuck. Bryce stared at Nyla for a long moment before grinning. So this is Detroit girl. Nyla tried to walk around him. Bryce moved sideways deliberately and slammed his shoulder into her tray. Food exploded across her hoodie and crashed onto the cafeteria floor. The room erupted with laughter. Someone shouted. World Star phones instantly appeared everywhere. Nyla froze for half a second as milk dripped from her sleeve. Bryce leaned closer. You gonna cry or something? Another football player barked out laughing. Mason watched from across the cafeteria with visible amusement, while Ethan Cole circled nearby holding his phone camera up openly. Ethan wasn't an athlete. He was worse in a different way. Skinny. Sharp-eyed. Obsessed with live streams and social media drama. Ethan made himself valuable by recording everything dirty that happened around the football team. Yo. Get her face. Ethan muttered, while filming. Nyla slowly set the tray down. The cafeteria quieted slightly. Everyone expected her to explode. Instead, she bent down, picked up the carton of milk, and placed it back on the tray without saying a word. Bryce blinked in confusion. That's it. Nyla looked him directly in the eyes for the first time. There was no fear in her expression. That bothered him instantly. Mrs. Graves finally rushed over from the faculty section. All right. Enough? Bryce. Apologize. Bryce laughed. For what she ran into me. Several students snickered again. Mrs. Graves hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Everyone saw it. She wasn't going to challenge him seriously. Because Bryce Holloway was protected. Because Mason Reed brought championships. Because Westbridge Academy only cared about reputation. Nyla grabbed her soaked backpack and walked out of the cafeteria alone while Ethan uploaded the video immediately. Caption: Detroit girl gets humbled first day within an hour. The clip spread across the school's private student network. By the end of the afternoon, strangers were whispering the nickname every time Nyla passed through the halls. Detroit girl. That evening, Principal Wallace sat alone inside his office, reviewing disciplinary reports when his desk phone rang unexpectedly. Wallace speaking. A deep male voice answered calmly. If that girl gets touched again, your school is going to have a very serious problem. Wallace's face drained of color instantly. Who is this? The caller ignored the question. You have no idea who Nyla Carter really is. The line went dead. Wallace stared at the phone in silence. Breathing harder now. Sweat formed near his temple as memories he had buried years ago suddenly resurfaced. Outside, near the girls' locker room after gym practice, Bryce leaned casually against the wall, waiting for Mason when Nyla exited carrying her bag. For a brief second, the loose collar of her shirt shifted slightly. Bryce's eyes narrowed. A long scar stretched across the top of her shoulder. Not an accident scar. A fight scar. The kind fighters carried. Nyla immediately adjusted her shirt and walked away without noticing him staring. Bryce watched her disappear down the hallway, his expression slowly changing from amusement to suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" he muttered quietly. And for the first time since Nyla arrived at Westbridge Academy, Bryce Holloway stopped seeing her as an easy target. He started seeing her as a mystery. By Nyla Carter's third day at Westbridge Academy, the entire school had turned her existence into entertainment. Everywhere she walked, Conversations lowered just enough for her to hear whispers trailing behind her like smoke. Detroit girl. Violent freak. Charity transfer. Some students stared openly while others pretended not to notice her at all, which somehow felt worse. The video of Bryce humiliating her in the cafeteria had spread far beyond the campus network now. Clips edited with laughing emojis and rap music flooded student accounts overnight. Ethan Cole made sure of that. He followed drama, the way sharks followed blood. And Nyla had become the biggest source of attention Westbridge had seen in months. But Bryce Holloway had stopped laughing. Ever since seeing the scar on Nyla's shoulder outside the locker room, something about her had started bothering him. Weak people flinched. Weak people panicked. Weak people begged teachers for help. Nyla did none of those things. She absorbed humiliation like someone used to surviving worse. That calmness irritated Bryce more every hour. Friday afternoon sunlight burned across the football field. While players trained under screaming coaches, Mason Reed stood near the sideline, throwing passes effortlessly, while girls in the bleachers cheered every completed throw like it was professional sports. Bryce leaned against the fence beside him, watching Nyla across the campus parking lot as she walked toward the gym building alone. "You're obsessed with her already," Mason said casually. Bryce ignored him. "Something's off about that girl." Mason smirked. "She's scared. That's what's off." "Nah." Bryce kept staring. "She's hiding something." Mason laughed and tossed the football to another player. "I'll bet you $50 she cries before next Friday." Bryce finally looked at him. "That's your big goal now, make the new girl cry," Mason shrugged. "Whole school's watching. Gotta keep things interesting." Near the bleachers, Ethan quietly filmed the conversation on his phone while pretending to edit football footage. He uploaded clips constantly now. Not publicly yet, just inside private student groups where humiliating people had practically become school culture. Every insult, every shove, every rumor. Content. And Nyla was trending. Later that afternoon, Nyla stepped into the gym for mandatory conditioning class. The massive room echoed with bouncing basketballs, whistles, and shouting athletes. She kept her head down and moved toward the equipment storage area to grab training mats, after Coach Daniels barked instructions at her without even learning her name. As soon as she entered the storage room, the heavy metal door slammed shut behind her. Then came the click of a lock. The laughter outside started immediately. Nyla walked toward the door calmly and pushed once. Locked. "Yo." Detroit Bryce's voice shouted through the metal. "You still alive in there?" More laughter exploded outside. Someone pounded on the door. Another voice yelled, "Careful. She might attack somebody." Nyla stepped backward slowly and looked around the dark storage room. Old football pads hung from hooks along the walls beside shelves of broken gym equipment. Then her eyes landed on the writing spray-painted across the concrete wall directly in front of her. "Go back to the ghetto. Animals don't belong here." A racial slur stretched across the center in thick black paint. For the first time since arriving at Westbridge, Nyla's expression cracked slightly. Not fear. Anger. Real anger. Outside, Ethan secretly live-streamed the entire thing from his phone while students gathered around laughing. Comments exploded across the screen faster than he could read them. "She actually locked in there, Bryce. Is insane. Detroit girl finally trapped." Then a female voice cut through the noise. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" Kiara Bennett pushed through the crowd angrily. Unlike most students at Westbridge, Kiara didn't dress like she came from money. Ripped jeans, oversized hoodie, silver nose ring. She looked at Bryce with disgust. "Open the door." Bryce grinned lazily. "Mind your business. She didn't do anything to you. That's where you're wrong," Mason said while approaching from the hallway. She showed up. A few students laughed again. Kiara looked around at the crowd, recording everything. "You're all pathetic." The atmosphere changed instantly. At Westbridge, defending the wrong person was dangerous socially. Several girls nearby exchanged looks and quietly stepped away from Kiara, like standing near her might become contagious. Mason's smile faded slightly. "You want to join her in there?" Kiara held his stare for a long second but didn't answer. Inside the storage room, Nyla closed her eyes briefly and controlled her breathing. Her fists tightened once before relaxing again. She could hear every laugh outside the door, every insult, every phone notification. She had heard worse before, much worse. But memories she spent years trying to bury began crawling back into her head anyway. Crowded gyms, men yelling, blood on canvas floors, cameras flashing, her father screaming instructions from outside a cage. Nyla opened her eyes sharply. No, not again. Suddenly the door unlocked. Bryce stood there smirking as the crowd backed away to film her reaction. Nyla stepped out slowly without saying a word. Her eyes passed over every face in the hallway. Mason, Bryce, Ethan, the students laughing, Kiara standing alone near the lockers. For one strange moment, the hallway became quiet, because Nyla looked furious now. Not emotional. Dangerous. Bryce noticed it immediately. That night after school, rain poured across the nearly empty parking lot behind the stadium. Nyla walked toward the bus stop wearing headphones, while distant thunder rolled overhead. She sensed someone following her before she even turned around. Bryce. He walked behind her slowly with his hands inside his hoodie pockets. "You got a problem?" Nyla asked coldly. Bryce smirked. "Maybe I'm just curious." "About what you?" Nyla turned away and kept walking. Bryce suddenly grabbed her shoulder hard. The reaction happened instantly. Before Bryce could even process it, Nyla twisted sideways, trapped his wrist with terrifying precision, and snapped his arm downward violently. Pain exploded through Bryce's body as his knees nearly buckled from the pressure. Nyla released him immediately and stepped back. The entire movement had taken less than 2 seconds. Bryce stared at his wrist in complete shock. No hesitation. No panic. Pure trained reflex. Rain dripped from his hair as he looked back at her. "There's no way," he muttered. "No way a girl like you just did that." Nyla's face went cold again. "Then stop touching me." She walked away into the rain without looking back. Hidden several cars away, Ethan lowered his phone slowly, his heart racing. He replayed the footage frame by frame. Bryce reached. Nyla pivoted. Joint lock. Controlled release. Professional technique. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. That wasn't street fighting. That was training. Real training. A slow smile spread across his face as ideas started forming in his mind. "Who are you?" Nyla Carter. Back inside his bedroom later that night, Ethan opened his laptop and began digging through old sports archives, underground fight clips, and forgotten local headlines. Because suddenly, humiliating Nyla Carter wasn't enough anymore. Now he smelled a story. The video of Bryce Holloway getting his wrist twisted in the parking lot spread through Westbridge Academy like wildfire. Even though Ethan Cole never uploaded the full clip publicly, he didn't need to. Rumors moved faster than evidence inside the school. By Monday morning, football players whispered about how Bryce had almost gotten dropped by the Detroit girl. Some students exaggerated the story into a full fight. Others claimed Nyla had military training. Every version made Bryce look weak. And that was the one thing Bryce Holloway could never tolerate. The moment he walked through the front entrance of Westbridge, conversations stopped around him. A few students quickly looked away to hide their smirks. Bryce slammed his locker shut hard enough to echo down the hallway. Anybody got something funny to say? He snapped. Silence. But the silence itself humiliated him even more. Across the hall, Nyla Carter stood alone near the vending machines reading a worksheet quietly, pretending not to notice the tension surrounding her. That calm expression on her face made Bryce furious. She wasn't acting scared. She wasn't avoiding him. She wasn't even bragging. To Bryce, that felt disrespectful. By lunchtime, the football team had already turned against her completely. Mason Reed sat on top of one cafeteria table like a king holding court, while players around him laughed loudly every time Nyla walked past. Careful, one of them muttered. Street fighters coming through. Another added, don't make eye contact. She might bite. Laughter exploded again. Then Bryce walked into the cafeteria and slammed his tray down beside Mason. Nah, he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. She ain't a fighter. She's just another animal pretending to be human. The cafeteria went quiet for half a second before nervous laughter returned. Phones immediately lifted again. Nyla stopped walking. Everyone watched her carefully. Bryce smirked, expecting another reaction. But Nyla simply looked at him with tired eyes before continuing toward an empty table by herself. That somehow made the insult feel uglier. Even Mason noticed the atmosphere shifting slightly now. The jokes were becoming crueler, meaner, less playful, and more personal. But nobody stopped it because Westbridge Academy rewarded cruelty when it came from the right people. At the far side of the cafeteria, Ethan watched everything while editing footage on his laptop. Unlike Bryce, Ethan wasn't interested in dominance. He was interested in attention, virer l'attention. And after replaying the parking lot clip nearly 50 times over the weekend, he became convinced Nyla Carter was hiding something massive. That afternoon, Ethan skipped study hall and locked himself inside the school's small media production room. Multiple screens glowed around him while he searched old MMA archives, underground youth tournaments, and local sports channels from Detroit. Most results led nowhere. Then suddenly, one grainy video appeared. Ethan froze. The clip was nearly 5 years old and uploaded under a forgotten regional sports account. Inside a crowded MMA cage stood a younger version of Nyla, wearing black gloves and braided hair tied tightly behind her head. The announcer's voice cracked with excitement. And still undefeated, Nyla Carter. The crowd roared. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. Across from Nyla stood another teenage fighter twice as aggressive, throwing wild combinations against the cage, but Nyla moved differently. Calm, efficient, précis. One slip, one counter. Then a devastating elbow crashed into the girl's jaw before she collapsed unconscious onto the mat. The arena exploded. Ethan's mouth slowly opened. No freaking way. He immediately searched deeper and found more clips, interviews, local headlines, youth championship rankings. Nyla Carter had once been considered one of the most gifted young MMA fighters in the country, before vanishing completely from public competition 3 years earlier. This was bigger than school drama now. This was a story. Ethan quickly downloaded every clip he could find onto his laptop before grinning to himself. Tomorrow, the entire school would know exactly who Nyla Carter really was. Meanwhile, miles away from Westbridge's polished buildings and luxury neighborhoods, Nyla returned home to a rundown apartment complex, buried in one of the poorest districts outside the city. Broken streetlights flickered above cracked sidewalks, while distant sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Her mother, Renee Carter, stood inside the tiny kitchen folding laundry when Nyla entered. "You're late," Renee said quietly. "Bus issues." Renee immediately noticed the tension in her daughter's face. "They bothering you again?" Nyla tossed her backpack onto the couch. It's nothing. That school's full of rich kids who think they can do whatever they want. Nyla stayed silent. Renee stepped closer carefully. You promised me something before we moved here. I know. No fighting. Nyla looked away toward the apartment window. I said I know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air inside the apartment suddenly felt heavy with old memories neither wanted to revisit, especially the memories involving cages, blood, and Marcus Carter. Back at Westbridge later that evening, Ethan prepared to upload the old MMA footage onto the school network. He already imagined the reactions. Detroit girl exposed as underground cage fighter. Violent transfer student revealed. The video would explode overnight. But the second he opened the file, it disappeared. Ethan frowned. He checked another folder. Empty. Another. Gone. Every single clip had been deleted. What the hell? Panic flashed across his face as he searched through system logs desperately. Then he noticed something strange. Someone had remotely accessed the school media server using administrative credentials less than 2 minutes earlier. Principal Wallace. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. Why would the principal care enough to erase Nyla's videos? Confused. Ethan dug further into archived school records and old local articles connected to Wallace. What he found made his stomach tighten. 3 separate bullying incidents involving football players had been buried over the past 4 years. Hospitalizations. Assault accusation. Even one near-fatal hazing case. Every investigation mysteriously disappeared after donations from the Reed family increased dramatically. Wallace had been protecting them. For years, Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. This wasn't normal school corruption anymore. This was organized cover-up. Near midnight, rain poured across the city while Nyla sat awake beside her bedroom window, unable to sleep. The harassment at school kept replaying inside her head, alongside memories she tried desperately to bury. Crowds screaming, flashing cameras, her father's voice shouting instructions through chain-link fences. Then headlights suddenly swept across the apartment building. Nyla frowned. A black SUV slowly rolled to a stop outside. Her mother noticed it too. Renee's expression instantly changed from exhaustion to fear. Oh no. The vehicle engine shut off. A tall figure stepped out wearing a dark coat and gloves before walking calmly toward the apartment entrance. Nyla's pulse slowed dangerously because she recognized the man immediately. And if he was here now after all these years, then the past had finally found her again. Rain hammered against the apartment windows while Nyla Carter stood frozen in the middle of the living room, staring at the man outside the black SUV. The moment he stepped beneath the flickering streetlight, memories she had spent years trying to bury slammed back into her head all at once. Crowded arenas, camera flashes, blood-staining white canvas floors, her father shouting instructions from outside a cage while thousands of people screamed her name. Darius King looked older now, broader, more tired. But his presence still carried the same intimidating weight it had years ago inside every gym he ever walked into. Former professional fighter, legendary trainer, the man who had built Nyla into a national MMA prodigy before everything collapsed. Renee Carter opened the apartment door slowly, fear already visible on her face. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Darius ignored her and looked directly at Nyla. We need to talk. Nyla's expression hardened instantly. I got nothing to say to you. That's not your decision anymore. The tension inside the apartment became suffocating. Renee stepped between them immediately. She's done with fighting. Darius finally looked at her. You think they're gonna let her stay done? Silence. Nyla hated that silence because part of her already knew he was right. The next morning at Westbridge Academy, rumors exploded across campus before first period even started. Ethan Cole hadn't managed to recover the deleted MMA footage. But enough students had already heard whispers about Nyla's past to turn speculation into gossip. Hallways buzzed with distorted stories about underground cage fights and violent championships. Some students claimed she had been expelled for nearly killing another fighter. Others insisted her father used to run illegal fight clubs. By lunch, Mason Reed made sure the rumors became much uglier. He sat surrounded by football players near the center cafeteria table, while students gathered around listening like spectators at a show. "So let me get this straight," Mason said loudly. "Detroit girl's daddy trained her to beat people for money." Several players laughed. "Guess violence runs in the family." Bryce leaned beside the wall nearby, arms crossed, watching silently. Another player smirked. "I heard her father got shot." "Nah," Mason replied casually. "I heard he got killed by other criminals." More laughter followed immediately. Across the cafeteria, Nyla's hands tightened slowly around her tray. Kiara Bennett sat beside her now. Despite the growing backlash she faced for even speaking to Nyla, students had already started isolating Kiara socially. Friends stopped answering her texts. Cheerleaders whispered behind her back. But Kiara didn't move away. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "No," Nyla admitted. That answer surprised even herself, because the rumors about her didn't hurt nearly as much as hearing people twist her father's death into entertainment. At the far side of the room, Ethan watched the entire scene carefully while piecing together information on his laptop. The more he searched, the stranger Nyla's past became. Articles about her vanished abruptly 3 years ago. Fight records disappeared from databases. Interviews had been deleted. It was almost like someone had intentionally erased her from public memory. And every trail somehow led back to the same year her father died. Meanwhile, inside Principal Wallace's office, tension spread like poison. Wallace stood near his desk, while Mason casually leaned back in a chair across from him. "You need to control this situation," Wallace muttered nervously. Mason shrugged. "We are controlling it." "No. You're escalating it. She's the problem." Wallace slammed a folder onto the desk. "Your family already buried 3 incidents for this school. I can't keep cleaning up every mess you boys create." Mason's expression darkened slightly. "My father funds half this campus, and your father is exactly why I'm still sitting in this office." Wallace snapped before instantly regretting saying it aloud. Silence filled the room. Mason slowly stood up. "Then maybe you should remember who protects who around here." For the first time in years, Wallace looked genuinely afraid of one of his students. That evening, Darius drove Nyla and Renee across the city toward an abandoned MMA training facility hidden inside an old industrial district. Rusted signs still hung outside the building, faded beneath years of neglect. King, Combat Athletics. The place where Nyla Carter became famous. The place where her life shattered. Dust floated through the dark gym as Darius switched on overhead lights. Old cages still stood near the center of the room, while championship banners hung torn along the walls. Nyla stared silently at the training mats. "I told you I was done," she said coldly. Darius looked at her carefully. "You think I came back to drag you into another fight, then why are you here?" His face hardened. "Because your father didn't die over some random street robbery like your mother told you." Renee immediately turned pale. "Darius, she deserves the truth." Nyla slowly looked at her mother. "What is he talking about?" Renee couldn't answer. Darius stepped closer. "Your father was investigating a sports betting operation before he died. Illegal gambling tied to youth athletics, fixed fights, money laundering, recruitment scams." Nyla frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Darius's voice lowered. "Marcus found evidence linking the operation to wealthy donors connected to school sports programs across the state." Nyla's heartbeat slowed dangerously. Then Darius said the name, Reed. The gym suddenly felt freezing cold. The Reed family, Nyla whispered. Darius nodded grimly. Your father was preparing to expose them. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Renee closed her eyes painfully. You told her he died during a robbery. Nyla said quietly. I was trying to protect you, Renee snapped. Tears forming instantly. After Marcus died, people started following us, watching us. I had to get you away from fighting before they came after you too. Nyla staggered backward slightly as years of lies collapsed around her. Her father hadn't been a violent criminal. He had been silenced. Outside the old gym, hidden near the side entrance beneath the darkness, Bryce Holloway stood completely still beside his motorcycle. Every word inside the building had reached him. His face slowly lost all color. Because Bryce knew the Reed family controlled powerful people across the city, and if Darius was telling the truth, then this was no longer bullying. This was something far more dangerous. Something capable of destroying families, destroying careers, maybe even getting people killed. Inside the gym, Nyla stared at the old MMA cage, while rage slowly built behind her eyes for the first time in years. And somewhere deep inside her, the fighter she buried long ago was starting to wake up again. By Thursday, Westbridge Academy no longer felt like a school. It felt like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Rumors about Nyla Carter had completely consumed the campus. Some students whispered that she used to be a national MMA champion. Others insisted her father had ties to organized crime. Edited photos, fake fight posters, and cruel memes spread across student accounts every hour. Everywhere Nyla walked, phones followed. Every hallway became a stage. Every classroom became hostile territory. And Bryce Holloway wanted blood. Ever since overhearing the conversation at the abandoned MMA gym, Bryce had barely slept. The truth about the Reed family kept replaying in his head, mixing with years of loyalty, fear, and confusion. But instead of backing away, the pressure inside him twisted into anger. Because deep down, Bryce hated feeling manipulated, hated feeling weak. And somehow Nyla Carter had become the center of every crack forming in his world. Meanwhile, Mason Reed treated the entire situation like entertainment. Today's the day, he announced confidently inside the locker room before lunch, while football players circled around him laughing. Either Detroit girl finally snaps, or everybody sees she's all talk. Bryce sat silently on a bench nearby, wrapping tape around his knuckles tighter than necessary. Mason noticed immediately. You good? Bryce looked up slowly. You ever feel like we're pushing this too far? The locker room instantly quieted. Mason smirked like he couldn't believe what he just heard. You serious? Bryce didn't answer. Mason stepped closer. She embarrassed you. In front of everybody. That's not what I'm talking about. Then what are you talking about? Bryce hesitated for half a second too long. Mason's expression hardened slightly. For the first time in years, he looked at Bryce less like a friend and more like a possible problem. Across campus, Nyla sat alone outside the library with headphones on, trying to block out the noise surrounding her life. But even silence felt impossible now. Her father's truth haunted her every second. The Reed family, gambling, corruption, murder. Every answer only created more questions. Kiara Bennett dropped into the seat beside her carefully. You shouldn't eat in the cafeteria today, she warned quietly. Nyla removed one headphone. Why? Because something's planned. Nyla wasn't surprised. At this point, she muttered, something's always planned. Kiara leaned closer. I'm serious. Mason's been hyping everybody up all morning. Ethan's carrying camera equipment around again. Nyla stared toward the football field in silence. Part of her wanted to leave campus immediately. Another part of her was tired of running. By lunchtime, the cafeteria looked more crowded than usual. Students packed around tables, shoulder to shoulder, while phones stayed visible above trays like weapons waiting to record disaster. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement so intense it barely resembled normal conversation anymore. Ethan Cole stood near the center aisle, pretending to text, while secretly live-streaming through a hidden app connected to multiple student accounts. Viewer numbers climbed rapidly. Westbridge about to go crazy. Comments flooded the stream. Detroit girl fight incoming. Bryce gonna kill somebody. Nyla entered the cafeteria, carrying her tray calmly despite feeling every eye lock onto her instantly. The noise lowered around her like the room itself was holding its breath. Then Mason stood up slowly. "Yo," he shouted across the cafeteria. "Everybody make some room." Students immediately shifted backward. A circle started forming. Nyla stopped walking. Her pulse slowed. Bryce appeared beside one of the lunch tables. Jaw tight. Eyes burning with unstable energy. "This doesn't need to happen," Kiara whispered nervously behind Nyla. But it already had. Mason stepped closer with a grin. "You know what everybody wants to see." "Right." Nyla said nothing. "That tough act." Laughter spread through the crowd. Bryce moved behind her slowly, while Ethan repositioned his camera angle carefully. "You think you're scary because you know how to fight," Mason continued loudly. "Nah. You're just another violent little street kid pretending to matter." The word street kid hit differently now, because Nyla finally understood what they truly saw when they looked at her. Not a student. Not a person. A target. She turned slightly. "Move." Mason smiled wider. "Or what?" Then Bryce grabbed her from behind. Hard. His forearm locked around her throat, while the cafeteria erupted into screams and cheering simultaneously. Mason instantly caught both her wrists before she could move. "Fight back," somebody shouted. "Come on." Detroit phones flew into the air everywhere. Ethan's live stream exploded with viewers. Bryce tightened the choke harder. "You ain't so tough now," he hissed into her ear. Nyla's breathing shortened immediately. Her survival instincts screamed at her to react. But years of trauma froze her for one terrible second. The noise around her blurred together. She could hear her father's voice in her head again. "Protect yourself." Her eyes changed instantly. Mason noticed it first. Not fear. Calculation. Then everything happened too fast for most people to process. Nyla stomped backward into Bryce's knee with brutal force. The second his balance shifted, she trapped his arm, twisted her hips, and launched him completely over her shoulder. Bryce crashed across a cafeteria table so violently that trays exploded onto the floor around him. The room screamed. Before Mason could react, Nyla pivoted sharply and trapped his arm against her shoulder. A horrifying popping sound echoed through the cafeteria as Mason collapsed to one knee. Yelling in pain, two football players rushed her immediately. Big mistake. The first barely swung before Nyla drove an elbow directly into his jaw. The second player charged recklessly and got slammed headfirst into another table hard enough to send drinks flying everywhere. Silence. Absolute silence. Hundreds of students stood frozen in shock. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Bryce groaned across the broken table, struggling to breathe. Mason clutched his shoulder in disbelief, while staring up at Nyla like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not prey. Not entertainment. A real fighter. Nyla stood in the middle of the destroyed cafeteria, breathing heavily, while phones continued recording from every angle. Years of restraint cracked apart inside her all at once. Nobody moved. Then suddenly, somewhere near the back of the cafeteria, a student shouted loudly, "Wait, I know." Her heads turned instantly. The boy pushed through the crowd while staring at Nyla in disbelief. "Oh my God, that's Nyla Carter," silence deepened. "She fought in the National Youth Championships. My brother used to watch her fights online." Murmurs exploded across the cafeteria. "No way. That's her." The undefeated girl. Nyla's stomach dropped, because now the secret was fully out. Ethan lowered his phone slowly, staring at the live stream numbers climbing faster than he had ever seen before. Thousands of viewers, then hundreds of thousands as clips spread across social media platforms within minutes. Westbridge girl destroys football players. Secret MMA fighter exposed. Violent champion snaps at school. The internet moved like wildfire. Across the cafeteria, Mason slowly rose to his feet, holding his injured shoulder, while rage twisted across his face. But beneath that rage was something new. Fear. Because for the first time in his life, Mason Reed realized there were some people money and popularity couldn't instantly control. That realization terrified him. Hours later, long after ambulances and school security cleared the cafeteria, Ethan sat alone in his bedroom, watching his live stream numbers continue exploding worldwide. 1 million views. Then 2. Then 5. News accounts started reposting clips. Sports pages picked up the story. Reaction videos appeared within hours. And somewhere across the city, inside expensive offices and private homes belonging to powerful people connected to the Reed family, phones started ringing non-stop. Because the moment Nyla Carter fought back publicly, the truth they buried years ago suddenly became dangerous again. By the next morning, Westbridge Academy had become national news. Satellite vans lined the streets outside the school entrance, while reporters shouted questions at students trying to enter campus. News helicopters circled overhead. Security guards struggled to control crowds gathering behind metal barricades. Every major social media platform was flooded with clips from the cafeteria fight, each edited differently depending on who wanted to control the narrative. Some videos painted Nyla Carter as a victim who finally defended herself after weeks of harassment. Others turned her into a violent predator. Headline after headline exploded online. Teen MMA fighter attacks football players inside elite school. Was Nyla Carter defending herself? Dangerous transfer student sparks chaos at Westbridge Academy. The internet had split into two sides overnight, and neither side truly understood what was happening. Inside the school hallways, the atmosphere felt toxic. Students whispered while refreshing their phones every few seconds. Teachers looked nervous. Administrators avoided eye contact. Everywhere Nyla walked, cameras followed her like she was a criminal being escorted through court. Nyla kept her hood up and moved silently through the crowd. But the pressure surrounding her felt suffocating now. She could hear fragments of conversations everywhere. "That girl's insane." "No. They attacked her first. She almost broke Mason's arm. They deserved it. Her father was some criminal fighter." Right. The rumors kept mutating faster than truth could survive. Near the main entrance, Ethan Cole stood surrounded by reporters, trying to buy information from him. Since he recorded the original live stream, media companies suddenly treated him like a celebrity witness. Did Nyla threaten anyone before the fight? Was there racial tension at the school before this? "Do you believe she's dangerous?" Ethan answered carefully, enjoying the attention far more than he should have. But even he was starting to realize the situation had grown beyond entertainment, because powerful people had started getting involved. Inside Principal Wallace's office, the emergency school board meeting had already turned ugly. Wallace stood sweating beside a projector screen showing screenshots from the viral fight, while several board members argued loudly around a long conference table. She assaulted 4 students. One woman snapped. She was being choked unconscious. Another replied immediately, Athletes from our school are now being accused of racial harassment across national television. Wallace rubbed his forehead anxiously. The press is destroying us. Then the office doors opened. Charles Reed walked in. The room instantly fell silent. Mason's father carried the same cold authority that made people lower their voices automatically around him. Expensive suit. Perfect posture. Controlled expression. A man used to owning every room he entered. We need this handled immediately. Charles said calmly. Wallace nodded too quickly. Of course. Charles looked around the room. The Carter girl must be suspended before this damages my family any further. One board member hesitated. Legally. That could create backlash. If the public believes she acted in self-defense. Charles's eyes hardened. Then change what the public believes. The room fell silent again. Everyone understood exactly what that meant. By afternoon, major news channels suddenly began airing edited versions of the cafeteria footage, showing only Nyla attacking the football players. The moments where Bryce choked her and Mason restrained her arms were missing completely. Comment sections turned vicious immediately. She's a thug. Why was someone like this allowed into school? Expel her. Nyla sat alone inside an empty classroom, watching the coverage on a muted television, while rage slowly built inside her chest. Not because people hated her. She was used to that. What terrified her was how easily the truth disappeared, once powerful people decided to rewrite it. Kiara Bennett rushed into the room, holding her phone tightly. You need to see this. Nyla looked up. Kiara's hands trembled slightly. I found another angle. She explained quickly. One of the students near the cafeteria exit had accidentally recorded the entire incident from behind the crowd. Unlike Ethan's live stream, this version showed everything clearly. Bryce grabbing Nyla from behind. Mason pinning her arms. The crowd screaming for violence. Nyla defending herself only after being physically attacked. They cut all of this out. Kiara whispered angrily. They're trying to frame you. Nyla stared at the footage silently. Then Kiara made a decision. Screw this. Before Nyla could stop her, Kiara uploaded the full, unedited clip directly onto multiple social platforms at once. Within minutes, the internet exploded again. Public opinion shifted violently. Hashtags supporting Nyla began trending nationwide. Number, she was attacked. Number, justice for Nyla. Number, Westbridge racism news anchors who condemned her hours earlier suddenly changed their tone live on air. Even worse for Westbridge. Former students started posting anonymous stories about years of racism, hazing, and abuse, hidden inside the school. The entire institution began collapsing publicly in real time. Meanwhile, inside the Reed mansion, Mason finally snapped. He hurled a crystal glass across the living room hard enough to shatter against the fireplace while expensive paintings rattled on the walls. This is her fault, he screamed. She ruined everything. Charles Reed stood near the bar, silently watching his son destroy furniture like an animal. Mason grabbed another bottle and smashed it across the floor. You said this school belonged to us. It does. Charles answered coldly. Then fix it. Mason's breathing became unstable now. Years of unchecked entitlement, collapsing under public humiliation. For the first time in his life, he couldn't control how people saw him. Online, millions now viewed him as a racist bully, and he hated it. I should have broken her face the first day. He snarled. The slap came so fast Mason barely saw it. Charles struck him across the mouth, hard enough to stagger him backward into the table. The room went completely silent. You stupid boy, Charles said quietly, his voice more terrifying than yelling. Do you understand what you've done? Mason touched his bleeding lip in disbelief. Charles stepped closer. My political donors are calling me non-stop. News stations are digging into our finances. Do you realize how dangerous this situation has become? For the first time since childhood, Mason looked genuinely afraid of his father. Across town later that evening, Nyla sat outside the abandoned MMA gym while the city lights flickered beneath dark clouds overhead. Kiara sat beside her quietly, while endless notifications flooded Nyla's phone. Support messages, death threats, interview requests, people calling her a hero, people calling her a monster. Nyla felt numb to all of it. Then Bryce Holloway suddenly appeared near the edge of the parking lot. His face looked pale, exhausted, different. Nyla immediately stood up. Bryce glanced around nervously before speaking. I know who killed your father. The world seemed to stop moving for one terrifying second. Kiara froze. Nyla's heartbeat slowed sharply. Bryce swallowed hard. And if the wrong people find out I told you. Headlights suddenly flashed across the parking lot. A black vehicle turned the corner at high speed. Bryce's eyes widened instantly. Oh God! Without another word. He backed away rapidly and disappeared into the darkness between nearby buildings before Nyla could stop him. The black SUV slowed near the gym entrance. Nyla stared at it, her pulse hammering now, because in that moment, she finally understood something horrifying. This was never just about school bullying. She was standing at the edge of something much larger, something powerful enough to silence people, maybe even kill them. The morning after Bryce Holloway vanished, Westbridge Academy felt haunted. Students gathered in tight circles across the hallways, whispering theories while police officers moved through campus, questioning football players and teachers. Bryce's locker remained half open near the athletic wing, untouched since the night before. His phone was off. His car was still parked behind the stadium. Nobody had seen him since he ran from the abandoned MMA gym after telling Nyla Carter he knew who killed her father, and that terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Rain clouds hung low above the city as reporters continued surrounding the school entrance like vultures waiting for another disaster. The cafeteria fight still dominated social media. But Bryce's disappearance had transformed the story into something darker. News channels speculated about gang involvement, kidnapping, drugs, and violence tied to elite school culture. Some students even accused Nyla online, claiming Bryce disappeared because he was afraid of her. Inside the hallway outside homeroom, Nyla could feel the stairs following her again. Only now they carried fear instead of mockery. That's her, the fighter girl. Bryce talked to her before he vanished. Do you think she knows something? Nyla ignored the whispers and walked toward her locker. But exhaustion weighed heavily on her face. She hadn't slept all night. Every time she closed her eyes, she kept replaying Bryce's final expression at the gym parking lot. Fear. Real fear. Not the arrogant anger he usually carried. The kind of fear people showed right before something terrible happened. Kiara Bennett approached quickly from down the hall, holding her phone tightly. Police are checking security cameras around downtown. Nyla looked at her carefully. Did they find anything? Kiara shook her head. Nothing official. That word, official, lingered strangely between them now. Because both girls had started understanding how easily evidence disappeared whenever powerful people became involved. Across campus, Mason Reed sat silently inside the football locker room staring at his phone while teammates argued nervously around him. This is getting crazy. Cops came by my house this morning. My parents think Bryce got arrested. Mason barely heard any of it. For the first time in his life, he looked genuinely shaken. Because Bryce wasn't just another teammate. Bryce had been beside him almost every day since middle school. They covered for each other, protected each other, and despite everything, Mason knew one important truth about Bryce: he never ran from fights. So if Bryce disappeared willingly, something must have scared him badly. The locker room television suddenly switched to a live news segment discussing corruption allegations tied to Westbridge Academy. Mason instantly grabbed the remote and muted it before reporters could mention his family name again. Too late. One teammate looked at him carefully. "You think your dad knows something?" The room went silent immediately. Mason slowly stood up. "Watch your mouth." But even as he said it, doubt started creeping into his own mind, because over the last few days, his father's behavior had changed completely. Secret meetings, locked office calls, late-night arguments with lawyers. Charles Reed no longer looked angry about bad publicity. He looked nervous, and Mason had never seen his father nervous before. Meanwhile, inside Principal Wallace's office, pressure from the school board intensified by the hour. Wallace sat sweating through his dress shirt while lawyers, public relations advisors, and angry board members shouted over each other around the conference table. "A missing student connected to a national scandal is catastrophic. We need damage control immediately. Police are requesting surveillance footage." Wallace rubbed his face tiredly. "Then give them the footage." A board member snapped back instantly. "All of it." Silence. Wallace's eyes lowered. Because everybody in the room understood the problem. Westbridge surveillance systems had captured years of harassment, violence, and illegal behavior involving students connected to wealthy families. If investigators dug too deeply, the school itself could collapse under lawsuits and criminal charges, and Charles Reed knew that better than anyone. Late that afternoon, Nyla finally returned home exhausted, only to find her mother standing frozen near the kitchen counter, holding a small package wrapped in stained cloth. Renee looked terrified. "It came 20 minutes ago," she whispered. Nyla stepped closer carefully. "What is it?" "No return address." Something about Renee's voice made Nyla's stomach tighten instantly. She slowly unwrapped the cloth. Inside was Bryce's silver chain necklace. Dark red blood covered part of it. Nyla froze. Beneath the necklace sat a folded note, written in black marker. "Stay quiet or you're next." For a moment, the apartment became completely silent except for Renee's shaky breathing. Then Nyla noticed something else. A second message written smaller beneath the first. "Your father should have stayed quiet too." Ice spread through Nyla's chest. This wasn't random intimidation anymore. Whoever sent this knew exactly who Marcus Carter was, and they wanted Nyla terrified. Renee grabbed her daughter's arm desperately. "We need to leave. Tonight." "No." "Nyla, no more running." But even as she said it, fear crawled beneath her skin because the threat suddenly felt real, in a way school bullying never had. Someone out there was watching them. Someone dangerous. Hours later, while rain poured across empty city streets, Mason quietly entered his father's home office for the first time in years without permission. Charles Reed wasn't there. Papers covered the desk beside multiple ringing phones and stacks of legal documents. Mason searched through the mess nervously until one folder caught his attention. Confidential payouts. Inside were records tied to Westbridge athletics, private security companies, and several names Mason recognized immediately. One of them was Bryce Holloway's father. Mason frowned. Then he noticed another file partially hidden beneath the folder. Marcus Carter. His blood ran cold. Before he could open it fully, headlights flashed suddenly through the office windows. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. Mason quickly shoved the folders back into place and stepped away just as the front door downstairs opened. Voices echoed through the house. His father had returned. Mason stood frozen in the darkness, heart pounding violently now, because for the first time in his life, he was starting to fear his own family. Near midnight, police investigators finally recovered traffic camera footage from several blocks away from the abandoned MMA gym. The grainy video showed Bryce Holloway sprinting across the street looking terrified seconds before a black SUV cut sharply in front of him. Two large men stepped out. Bryce tried to run. One punched him hard in the stomach. The other forced him into the vehicle while he struggled violently. Then the SUV disappeared into the night. The footage lasted only 14 seconds. But it was enough. Because now Bryce Holloway wasn't just missing. He had been taken, and somewhere across the city, Nyla Carter stared out her bedroom window, realizing the same horrifying truth growing inside Mason Reed's mind. There were people behind this powerful enough to erase evidence, manipulate schools, threaten families, and make students disappear. The city looked completely different after midnight. Rainwater reflected neon lights across empty streets, while distant sirens echoed between abandoned industrial buildings on the south side of town. Nyla Carter sat silently in the passenger seat of Kiara Bennett's beat-up Honda, staring out the window while gripping Bryce Holloway's blood-stained necklace tightly in her hand. Neither girl had spoken much during the drive, because both of them understood one terrifying fact. Now Bryce hadn't disappeared because of school drama. He had been taken because he knew something. And if he was still alive somewhere, time was running out. Kiara parked beside an old warehouse district near the riverfront and killed the headlights immediately. "This is where the SUV was last tracked," she whispered. Nyla stepped out into the cold rain slowly. Scanning the dark streets around them, the industrial area looked abandoned at first glance. But subtle signs of activity hid in the shadows. Expensive black vehicles, security cameras mounted near broken buildings, armed men standing beneath loading docks pretending to smoke cigarettes. This wasn't random criminal territory. It was organized. Kiara swallowed nervously. "You really think Bryce is here? I think somebody doesn't want him talking." They moved carefully between buildings, while thunder rolled overhead. Every instinct inside Nyla screamed danger now. Years of MMA training had sharpened her awareness long ago, and the silence surrounding the warehouses felt wrong, too controlled, too quiet. Then Nyla noticed something. Voices. She quickly pulled Kiara behind a stack of rusted shipping containers just as two men exited a nearby warehouse entrance. "Reed wants everything cleaned before investigators dig deeper." And the kid pause. Still alive for now. Nyla's pulse slowed dangerously. "Kid." "Bryce." The men continued talking while loading heavy duffel bags into the back of a black SUV, identical to the one from the traffic camera footage. Kiara's face turned pale. "Oh my God." Nyla kept listening. "The school situation already blew up online. We can't risk another witness." "Then why not get rid of him already?" "Because Charles wants names first." Nyla felt ice spread through her chest. Charles Reed. Mason's father. The same name connected to her father's death. Suddenly headlights flashed across the far end of the alley. Another SUV approached slowly. Nyla grabbed Kiara instantly. "Move." They slipped deeper into the industrial maze, seconds before armed guards started exiting vehicles nearby. More men than before. Larger. Professional. Not gang members. Security contractors. The kind rich people hired to make problems disappear quietly. Inside another building several blocks away, Ethan Cole adjusted his camera lens nervously while hiding behind shattered office windows overlooking the warehouse district. Unlike Nyla and Kiara, Ethan came alone chasing the biggest story of his life. And now he regretted it. Because everything he filmed tonight felt less like corruption and more like organized crime. His camera zoomed carefully toward the main warehouse entrance. Several wealthy men exited expensive cars beneath security lights while guards surrounded the perimeter. Ethan recognized one face immediately from television. A city councilman. Another man was connected to state athletic commissions. Then Ethan's breathing stopped. Charles Reed stepped out of a black SUV. Ethan nearly dropped the camera. What the hell is this? He quickly recorded everything while panic mixed with adrenaline inside his chest. Meetings. Security exchanges. Vehicles arriving with no license plates. It looked like some kind of underground operation involving powerful people from across the city. Then the warehouse doors opened briefly, and Ethan saw Bryce. Bruised. Bleeding. Alive. Bryce was dragged across the warehouse floor by two men while struggling weakly against them. Ethan zoomed tighter. Heart racing violently now. This is insane. Back near the loading docks. Nyla and Kiara quietly slipped through a side entrance after spotting a distracted security guard. The inside of the warehouse smelled like oil, smoke, and damp concrete. Dim lights flickered overhead, while voices echoed somewhere deeper inside the structure. Kiara whispered shakily, "We should call the police." Nyla stopped walking. "You still trust them?" Kiara couldn't answer. Because after everything involving Wallace, the school board, and the Reed family, trust felt impossible now. They moved deeper through narrow hallways until Nyla suddenly froze beside a cracked office doorway. Inside, stacks of documents covered several tables. Financial records, sports betting sheets, names of athletes beside dollar amounts, fight results, game scores, rigged outcomes. Kiara stared in disbelief. This whole thing? It's bigger than school sports. Nyla flipped through pages rapidly. College recruitment manipulation, illegal gambling rings, payments connected to youth athletic programs across multiple states. And one name appeared repeatedly near the top of several files. Marcus Carter. Her father. Nyla's hands tightened instantly. He found all of this. Before Kiara could respond, footsteps suddenly echoed nearby. Voices approaching fast. Nyla grabbed the files and pulled Kiara into darkness just as armed men entered the office moments later. "Someone's inside." Another voice answered coldly, "Find them." Instantly, the warehouse exploded into chaos. Flashlights swept through corridors, while guards spread across different sections of the building. Nyla and Kiara sprinted through dark hallways as shouting erupted behind them. There, a flashlight beam caught them briefly. Men started chasing immediately. Kiara nearly slipped on wet concrete, while Nyla dragged her forward through another doorway. Her fighter instincts took over completely now. Every movement became precise, controlled. Survival mode. Behind them, heavy boots pounded closer. Then suddenly, a loud crash echoed across the warehouse. Everyone stopped. Another shout followed from the upper catwalks. "Somebody's recording Ethan." One of the guards had spotted his camera reflection. Panic exploded upstairs as Ethan grabbed his equipment and ran across the metal catwalks while security teams chased after him violently. "Stop him!" Ethan's breathing became frantic as he jumped over broken railings and sprinted toward the emergency stairwell. His camera still recorded everything wildly shaking in his hands. He had enough evidence now to destroy careers, maybe entire families. But he never made it outside. Halfway down the stairwell, a massive figure emerged from the darkness below and slammed directly into him. The camera flew from Ethan's hands and smashed against the concrete floor. Pain exploded through his skull. Ethan collapsed hard, barely conscious. Through blurred vision, he saw one of the men pick up the damaged camera carefully. Got the footage. Another guard checked the memory card before nodding. All of it. Ethan tried to move. A boot crashed into his ribs instantly. Darkness swallowed him moments later. Meanwhile, somewhere deeper inside the warehouse, Nyla heard the noise and realized with horror what it meant. The evidence was gone. And now, whoever controlled this operation knew exactly how close they had come to being exposed. The challenge spread across the country in less than an hour. By sunrise, every major social platform carried the same headline beside edited clips of Nyla Carter, destroying Westbridge football players inside the cafeteria. Mason Reed challenges Nyla Carter to public fight. Some called it revenge. Others called it insanity. But the people truly paying attention understood something darker was happening beneath the surface. Especially Nyla. She sat silently inside the abandoned MMA gym, while dozens of notifications flooded her phone every second. Sports influencers, news stations, celebrities, former fighters, everyone suddenly wanted a piece of the story. The challenge video Mason posted the night before already had millions of views. In the video, Mason stood alone inside Westbridge Stadium beneath bright floodlights, bruises still visible across his face from the cafeteria fight. "You want to prove you're not some violent thug hiding behind sneak attacks," he said directly into the camera. "Then fight me for real." He smirked afterward, but the anger behind his eyes looked unstable now. No teachers, no security, no excuses. Then came the line everybody remembered. Friday night. Westbridge Fieldhouse. Winner takes everything. The internet exploded immediately. Some viewers treated it like entertainment. Others begged authorities to stop it. But privately, Nyla already knew this wasn't about pride anymore. It was bait. Kiara Bennett paced nervously nearby while Ethan Cole sat against the far wall, holding an ice pack against his ribs. His face remained swollen from the warehouse attack 2 nights earlier. "They tried to kill us," Kiara said angrily, "and now this psychopath wants a public fight." Ethan looked toward Nyla carefully. "You know it's a setup, right?" Nyla didn't answer immediately, because deep down, she understood something terrifying. If she refused the challenge, the media would destroy her reputation again. Mason's supporters would paint her as a fraud, hiding behind victimhood. But if she accepted, she would be walking directly into danger. Darius King entered the gym, carrying a duffel bag before tossing it onto the floor. "You're not fighting him." Nyla looked up slowly. "I don't think I have a choice anymore." "Yes. You do." "No." Her voice hardened. "They've been hunting me since the day I got here." Darius stared at her silently. Then he finally admitted the truth. Neither wanted to say aloud, "They're trying to finish what they started with your father." The gym became quiet again. Nyla lowered her eyes briefly toward the old cage in the center of the room. Memories flooded back harder than ever now. Her father teaching her combinations, teaching her discipline, teaching her how to survive pressure without losing herself to anger. Marcus Carter never trained her to hurt people. He trained her so nobody could ever control her through fear. And now fear surrounded every part of her life again. Across town inside the Reed mansion, Mason prepared differently. The once perfect golden boy of Westbridge now looked exhausted, paranoid, and dangerously unstable. He wrapped athletic tape around his fists while pacing inside his private gym as television networks replayed footage of Nyla's cafeteria fight behind him. Charles Reed stood near the doorway watching silently. "You're making this worse," he said coldly. Mason laughed bitterly. "Too late for that. You humiliate yourself publicly again. And every investor connected to this family starts running." Mason stopped taping his fists. "You think I care about investors right now?" Charles stepped closer. "You should care about survival." That sentence lingered strangely in the room. Mason narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" Charles didn't answer immediately. And that silence finally broke something inside Mason. "You know what he snapped? Bryce disappeared after talking about you. People are getting attacked. Reporters are digging into your business deals. So maybe for once you should stop acting like I'm the problem." Charles's face darkened instantly. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." "Then tell me." Instead, Charles walked away. That terrified Mason more than yelling would have, because for the first time in his life, he realized his father might genuinely be hiding something monstrous. Friday night arrived under heavy rain clouds and flashing media lights surrounding Westbridge Fieldhouse. Thousands gathered outside despite police warnings. Students climbed fences just to watch. Influencers live-streamed from parking lots. News helicopters circled overhead again like predators, sensing blood. Inside the arena, tension felt suffocating. No official school approval existed for the fight. But somehow, security had mysteriously failed to stop the event from happening. Rows of students packed the bleachers chanting Mason's name while cameras flashed non-stop across the building. Nyla entered through the far tunnel, wearing a dark hoodie with Darius and Kiara beside her. The crowd erupted instantly, half cheering, half booing. Ethan limped behind them, carrying a hidden camera beneath his jacket, despite Darius warning him not to come. "This whole thing feels wrong," Ethan muttered nervously. Because it did. Security guards lined the walls, but not normal school security. Private contractors. The same kind Ethan saw inside the warehouse district. Nyla noticed them too. This really was a trap. At the center of the basketball court, Mason waited beneath bright overhead lights, wearing MMA gloves and black athletic tape across his knuckles. His face carried pure rage now. Stripped completely of the charming public image he once hid behind. The crowd screamed louder as Nyla stepped onto the court. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Mason spoke quietly enough that only Nyla could hear. "You ruined my life." Nyla stared at him coldly. "No, the truth did." Something dangerous flickered across Mason's face. Then he attacked. The first punch exploded toward Nyla's head with reckless violence. She slipped sideways instantly. Years of professional training taking over automatically, Mason kept charging forward wildly, throwing combinations fueled more by anger than skill. The crowd roared. Nyla blocked another punch and countered sharply into Mason's ribs, hard enough to stagger him backward. Gasps echoed through the arena immediately. People expected aggression. They weren't prepared for precision. Mason swung again. Nyla ducked beneath it and drove an elbow across his jaw. Blood sprayed onto the court. Students screamed. Mason stumbled backward, breathing harder now. Humiliated again in front of thousands. Then suddenly, the arena lights shut off. Darkness swallowed the gym. Panic erupted instantly. Students shouted. Phones flashed on everywhere. Security guards started moving through the crowd aggressively. Nyla's instincts screamed danger. "Get down," Darius shouted from somewhere nearby. A loud crash echoed near the entrance tunnel. Then, another voice screamed through the darkness. "Stop!" The lights flickered back on. Everyone froze. Bryce Holloway stood near center court, bruised, bleeding, and barely able to stay upright. The entire arena went silent. Mason stared at him in complete shock. Bryce looked half dead. One eye swollen shut, wrists covered in bruises. But despite the pain written across his face, rage burned inside his eyes, stronger than ever. Several armed security men immediately started pushing toward him through the crowd. Bryce pointed directly at Charles Reed standing near the lower bleachers. His voice cracked across the silent arena. He did it. The crowd froze. Bryce coughed violently before shouting again. Charles Reed ordered Marcus Carter, killed. Absolute chaos exploded instantly. Students screamed. Reporters surged forward. Phones lifted everywhere. Charles Reed's face lost all color for the first time in public. And standing beneath the arena lights, Nyla Carter realized the war she had been dragged into was finally out in the open. Westbridge Academy collapsed before sunrise. The moment Bryce Holloway publicly accused Charles Reed of ordering Marcus Carter's murder, the internet detonated harder than anyone imagined possible. Videos from the arena flooded every platform within minutes. Millions watched Bryce stumble across the basketball court covered in bruises, while security guards tried to silence him. Millions heard him scream the words that powerful people had spent years burying. Charles Reed ordered Marcus Carter killed by morning. National news networks had abandoned every other headline. Satellite trucks surrounded Westbridge Academy for the third time in 2 weeks. Except this time, reporters weren't chasing school drama anymore. They were chasing a criminal empire. Police barricades sealed every entrance to campus, while helicopters thundered overhead. Federal agents moved through school buildings, carrying evidence boxes as terrified administrators hid inside offices pretending they knew nothing. Students gathered behind fences filming everything. Teachers cried openly in parking lots. Parents screamed at school officials demanding answers. And at the center of the chaos stood Nyla Carter, the girl everyone mocked only days earlier. Now the entire country knew her name. Inside the main administration building, FBI agents stormed Principal Wallace's office, while cameras flashed through the hallway windows. Wallace looked completely destroyed already. Sweat soaked through his shirt, while investigators pulled financial records, deleted surveillance backups, and years of hidden disciplinary reports from locked cabinets. One agent slammed a folder onto the desk. "You signed every suppression order personally." Wallace's hands shook violently. "I was protecting the school." "No," the agent answered coldly. "You were protecting donors." Outside the office, students watched in stunned silence as Wallace was escorted through the hallway in handcuffs. The same principal who ignored racist harassment, the same man who erased evidence, the same man who protected violent athletes for money. Now photographers captured him lowering his head like a criminal, because that's exactly what he was. Meanwhile, chaos exploded inside the Reed mansion. Federal vehicles filled the driveway while agents searched every room carrying stacks of warrants connected to illegal gambling, racketeering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy charges. Expensive paintings came off walls. Safes were forced open. Lawyers shouted uselessly, while officers carried out computers and financial records by the box. Charles Reed stood near the center of the living room trying desperately to maintain composure. But the mask was finally cracking. News channels already displayed leaked documents connecting his business empire to illegal sports betting networks across multiple states. And Bryce Holloway had become the key witness. Mason Reed watched everything from the staircase above, like his entire world was burning in real time. Because it was. He looked exhausted now. Hollow-eyed. Broken. Nothing remained of the arrogant football king who once controlled Westbridge Academy. Only fear. One FBI agent passed him, while carrying evidence boxes labeled Reed Athletic Foundation. Mason whispered quietly, almost to himself. "This can't be real," but deep down, he already knew it was. Every secret meeting, every covered-up assault, every time his father manipulated school officials, the signs had always existed. Mason just never wanted to see them. Across the city inside protective custody, Bryce Holloway sat beneath harsh fluorescent lights while federal investigators recorded his testimony. Bruises covered nearly every inch of his face. His voice sounded weak from dehydration and beatings. But he kept talking anyway. Because now he understood something important. If he stayed silent, more people would die. "They kept me inside one of the river warehouses," Bryce explained. "Charles Reed's security people questioned me about what I overheard at the gym." An investigator leaned forward carefully. "Did Mr. Reed ever directly discuss Marcus Carter?" Bryce nodded slowly. One night I heard him arguing with somebody on the phone. He said Marcus Carter was supposed to disappear quietly after threatening to expose the gambling operation. The room became silent, except for the sound of keyboards typing rapidly. Bryce swallowed painfully before continuing. He also said the daughter might become a problem someday. Nyla sat on the opposite side of the interview room listening without speaking. Rage burned inside her chest. But beneath the anger lived something else now. Relief. For years, her father's death had existed like a ghost, buried beneath lies and rumors. People painted Marcus Carter as violent, criminal, dangerous. But the truth was finally surfacing. Marcus Carter died trying to expose corruption, and Nyla realized she had spent years ashamed of the wrong things. Outside the federal building, crowds had already started gathering, carrying signs supporting her. Justice for Nyla. Expose Westbridge. Marcus Carter deserved better. The same society that once mocked and feared her now treated her like a symbol. But Nyla didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. Very tired. Days later, Westbridge Academy officially shut down pending federal investigation. News reporters called it one of the largest corruption scandals involving youth athletics in state history. Former students came forward non-stop with stories of racism, violence, bribery, and intimidation hidden inside the school for years. Multiple coaches resigned. Board members vanished publicly. Scholarship programs collapsed overnight. The empire Charles Reed spent decades building was dying piece by piece on live television. And somewhere inside all that destruction, Nyla Carter quietly reclaimed herself. Weeks later, inside a packed MMA arena in Las Vegas, thousands of fans rose screaming as lights flashed across the stadium. Giant screens displayed highlights from amateur fights, while commentators discussed the most anticipated professional debut of the year. Nyla Carter, the girl once hunted across headlines. The fighter who survived Westbridge, the daughter of Marcus Carter. Backstage, Nyla wrapped tape around her hands calmly while Darius King adjusted gloves nearby. The atmosphere felt different now. Cleaner. Honest. Inside the cage, violence had rules, discipline, truth. Unlike the world outside it. "You nervous?" Darius asked quietly. Nyla thought for a moment, then shook her head. Because after surviving corruption, betrayal, public humiliation, and death threats, a fight no longer scared her. As her entrance music erupted through the arena, the crowd exploded deafeningly loud. Nyla stepped toward the tunnel slowly beneath flashing lights, while cameras followed every movement. Millions watched worldwide now. But for the first time in years, she wasn't running from who she was anymore. She was walking toward it. The arena lights reflected across her face as she entered the cage and looked out over the massive crowd surrounding her. Then something strange caught her attention. High above the arena, near the darkest section of the upper stands, a man sat alone watching her carefully. Black coat, cold expression, older than most fans there. And unlike everyone else cheering wildly around him, he looked at Nyla with pure hatred. Nyla's instincts sharpened immediately. The man never smiled, never clapped. He simply watched her the way predators watched prey. Then his phone vibrated. The man glanced down at the message briefly. 2 lines appeared across the screen. Marcus Carter's daughter survived too long. This time, she needs to disappear permanently. The man slowly lifted his eyes back toward Nyla inside the cage. And somewhere deep beneath the roaring crowd and flashing lights, danger was beginning all over again. And in the end, the people who laughed the loudest in that cafeteria were the same people forced to watch their entire world collapse in public. Nyla Carter came to Westbridge carrying trauma, silence, and a past she wanted to bury forever. but the cruelty, racism, and corruption inside that school pushed her into becoming something far more dangerous, the truth they could no longer control. From a bullied transfer student to a national symbol seen by millions, Nyla's story proved that sometimes the people treated like outsiders are the only ones brave enough to expose what everyone else is too afraid to confront. But here's the real question: if you were in Nyla's position, would you have stayed silent to survive, or fought back, knowing powerful people could destroy your life for it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story kept you hooked until the end, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more intense stories about betrayal, power, justice, and survival.